Mobile phones. Is the world going crazy? Find out in just a few seconds. Anyway, that said, I wanted to talk about my dilemma, because actually my dilemma is about these two devices. So as I said before, I've had a lot of mobile phones. I've had pre-Android and iOS phones, so like the Symbian operating system and all of those other Nokia operating systems that we used. I also had I've had a lot of Android phones, and I've had a lot of iOS phones. And I kind of moved away from iOS probably around the sort of Samsung Galaxy S5 days. So when I moved away from iOS, I liked the fact that Android phones gave you a bigger display. There was all this flexibility, because in the early days, iOS was still a bit limiting with different types of messaging and just stuff that Android had already got down to pat, and iOS were kind of on a catch-up, Apple were on a catch-up. So, I had a good long outing with a lot of Android devices, probably up to the Galaxy S9, I'm going to say. And I'd had a couple of Notes as well, and I actually love those phones. This is actually the OnePlus 6T. I actually had the OnePlus X in the days that OnePlus used to invite you to get a phone, and I absolutely love that phone. That phone was my go-to phone for travelling, because it had two SIM card slots, so I could keep my local SIM card, my own SIM card in the one SIM slot, and whatever country I was travelling to, I could pop their local SIM card in, and happy days. And that was absolutely brilliant, especially for mobile data, because up until a couple of years ago, mobile data was still horrendously expensive to use abroad. So yeah, definitely happy with my OnePlus X experience. The trouble with iOS and Android is iOS, of course, we all know, don't want to tell anybody anything they don't know, but obviously that's only available on Apple hardware. Android is available on many manufacturers' hardware, so it does give you a nice choice between hardware manufacturers. If you like a feature of a phone, some phones have come out with great cameras, great audio, snap-ons and all sorts of different things, fat, thin. You got the pen if you feel like that for the Galaxy Note series, and there's a whole bunch of different things to choose from. Now that does give you a problem in the sense that the hardware and the software aren't quite optimized for each other all of the time, and also, unless it's a Google Pixel now, but back in those days, unless it was like a Nexus or something like that, every other manufacturer would be skinning their phone, so they put their own sort of layer on top of the operating system, which meant either it would take a long time between updates, so Google bring out a new Android version, Samsung either bring out a new version of their UI, TouchWiz or whatever it was at the time. It might take a couple of years, or worst of all, they might never bother, because they've gone to a new version of hardware. Versions of hardware seem to be changing all the time, very, very frequent, at least once a year, if not twice a year, as we're seeing with some manufacturers. So in that regard, sometimes the manufacturers just decide, yeah, I'm not going to upgrade that old phone to the latest version. We won't bother skinning it. We'll bring out the new version on our new device. Of course, every hardware manufacturer wants to push you to buying their hardware. So, so that's kind of a little bit tricky in the sense of Android, but the upside of it is, it was so open, it was so flexible, and yeah, it was a bit, touch and go for the first years. Things didn't really work as great, and they weren't as slick. But I think now, with the advent of Android 9, I think it's incredible, and there's not a lot to differentiate between iOS and Android, apart from Android giving you that open flexibility that it always has done. So I'd enjoyed having all of these different Android phones from different manufacturers, and what I really, really, really started to like was the Android, yes, I'm gonna say it, but the manufacturers of Android phones started bringing out bigger screen phones, and they were using the real estate on the phones a lot more efficiently. So the actual phones weren't necessarily getting that much bigger, but the screen real estate, by making the bezel smaller and so forth, was making the phones, you know, much more usable. So yeah, I didn't really want a huge phone. I didn't, and I didn't really want a tiny phone. The iPhone was still, I think, at the time when, you know, the Galaxy S5 had a 5-inch screen or something like that, and the iPhone was still using like a 3.5-inch display, I'm going to say, and the phones weren't that much different in size, so, or physical dimensions. So, you know, that was really key for me. So guys, so enough of the whole plotted history about mobile phones. So it happened. The iPhone 10 or the iPhone X came out, and this was absolutely perfect. It was a great size, it had a full screen. Yeah, okay, you know, it didn't have the fingerprint thing anymore, which a lot of manufacturers were toying with. They were kind of putting it on the side of the phone, they were putting it on the back of the phone. But, you know, Apple decided to take that fingerprint sensor away. There's been a lot of talk about them having, you know, an embedded in-screen fingerprint sensor, and I'm sure that will probably come in the next version. However, the Face ID didn't do too bad of a job. I think Apple, you know, they're very good with their software, they make everything slick. So the switch between the fingerprint and the face was an easy switch to make with Apple. So I thought, this is perfect. Great size, great phone, camera was good. Again, we're talking about the camera. And I thought, yes, this is definitely the phone to get me back to the iOS camp. And I thought it was great. So I used that phone for a good year, and I was very happy with it. And then I saw the Huawei Mate 20 Pro, and I thought to myself, this is brilliant. It's got 3 cameras. I know, cameras, but, you know, for somebody that takes a lot of photographs for Instagram and YouTube and stuff like that, you know, the camera, I'm afraid, has become a bit of a driving force behind some of these devices. So I thought this Mate 20 Pro, it looked good, it was a premium build. I mean, don't get me wrong, Huawei phones were always considered to be cheap and nasty, but now they're making premium hardware, which, you know, if you put those things side by side, an Apple iPhone and a Huawei Mate 20 Pro, I mean, there's no differentiation anymore. They're both premium bits of kit. And like I said about the old camera here, the compact camera, with the Leica lens, you know, Leica make very good camera lenses. Well, hey, Huawei have put those camera lenses on the back of the Mate 20 Pro. So, looks like a great phone. The other thing is the wireless charging. I remember having this conversation years ago with friends of mine, talking about the fact of, wouldn't it be great if you could loan somebody some battery charge? You know, they're running down, everyone's phones nowadays. I mean, if you can get a day out of it, that's good. But everyone's phones obviously chew through battery, so wouldn't it be great if you could just, you know, top somebody up? And lo and behold, they've brought it out. They've brought out this reverse charging. So I thought, this has got to be my next phone going forward. So myself and a colleague from work, we did try to go and buy the Huawei Mate 20 Pro, but unfortunately it was like rocking horse shit, so we didn't actually manage to get one. Although, fast forward a few weeks later, and my colleague at work did buy one. He kept that phone. In fact, actually, first of all, he raved about it, and then, you know, he probably changes his phones more times than the chap from Unbox Therapy. So, you know, this guy, he's probably going to have 4 or 5 phones, 6 phones, 7 phones. This guy, he's probably going to have 10 phones in a year. But, you know, so I kind of trust his judgment on, you know, what's good, what's bad. And, you know, he does kind of like, you know, not that he goes on YouTube or anything like that giving reviews, but he will be quite happy to sit down with you for half an hour and go through all the whys and wherefores of these things. So he said to me, the Huawei phone, the Mate 20 Pro, it's a great phone, but he didn't like the UI. There was a whole bunch of things that he didn't like about it. And lo and behold, after a week, he sold it. So he sold that phone, and what did he buy? He bought this, the OnePlus 6T. Now this phone's in the sandstone case, and I can take it out. Just obviously everyone's seen, there it goes, sliding across the table. Everyone's seen these phones, very glassy, very glossy, dual camera. I mean, incredibly well made